Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Also. I'm the head of education at Arts and Culture Development Foundation, and today we're going to have a session by Ronan Brindli, the head of education and engagement at Manchester Art Gallery, as well as a fellow of Royal Society of Arts and the deputy chair of the Education Leadership Trust. This session will be dedicated to autism and to the experience of Manchester Art Gallery in working with people with autism. And the session will be in the framework of the educational program of Samarkand Half Marathon. And now I think I shall yield the floor to Ronan.
Thank you, Elsu. Well, first of all, thank you all, and thank you, Elsu, for this kind invitation. It is an honor to speak to the museum community in Uzbekistan, and I look forward to hopefully some more communication after this where we could share ideas, because I'm very interested in learning about the museum culture in Uzbekistan and how that works. So hopefully we will have some more discussions and conversations after this. Elsu kindly introduced me. I'm Ronan, and I lead a learning program at Manchester Art Gallery, which is one of the busiest art museums in Britain, outside of London. The first slide you can see is an image of the front part of the building, the oldest part of the building, which dates back to about 1830. And it was purpose-built as a gallery. The council, the municipality took it over in the 1860s. And always at the core of its values, it's been an educational establishment. It's in the city centre, and as I was just mentioning to Elsu prior to opening up my presentation, it's affected at the moment by the pandemic, because there's fewer people in the city centre and fewer people coming into the gallery. We've only part of the gallery open, and we have to have a one-way system going round. So it's actually quite complicated at the moment, but no doubt we'll touch on that later with regards to working with groups. Just to give you a little bit of an overview, we have about 650,000 visitors a year. And I should say our gallery is free. There's no charge to come into it. Amongst those 650,000 visitors, we have about 80,000 people who are actively engaged in our learning program. And our learning program runs from the very young. We have parents with newborn babies who are involved in activities at Manchester Art Gallery, to also our oldest residents. So we have quite a spectrum of learning initiatives that take place that obviously involve groups like school children, university students, young people. We have some programs that are for homeless people, and we also have programs that are for new arrivals to the city. So we have quite a broad program. And as I say, it fits in with what has always been the ethos of the gallery, that it's there for education and for everybody connected with the city to access the public art collection. I have a couple of slides here because sometimes people are a little bit surprised that we have babies and toddlers involved in the program. But as I mentioned, in our wider program, we have about 46,000 family members who come to the galleries for activities. And as you see with babies, it's often the activities are regard the senses: smelling, touching, feeling, looking at different colors. But it's a way that we get people used to the gallery and used to having the right to come into the gallery from a very early stage in life. One of the reasons I mention this is because the open door sessions, which are the sessions that we set up particularly for autistic children and their families, sits within this learning program, this family program. And some of the skills and some of the expertise that we learnt from working with children, we then kind of mapped over, because of course, autistic children are very keenly aware of senses, of smells, and touch. So there's some skills that we transferred across from our family program. The next few slides are just really wallpaper, if you like, and these are specifically from our autism program. In 2019, we celebrated World Autism Week with an event in partnership with a local school that specializes in working with autistic children at the gallery. And then we have, as I mentioned, or we used to have, I should say, our regular open door sessions, which run on the third Saturday of each month, that are specifically set up for autistic children and their families. But I'll talk a little bit more now about how this program came into place. Looking at statistics in Britain, there are about 700,000 individuals who are said to be on the autistic spectrum. So that's roughly about 1%. And diagnosis of autism or individual's position on the autistic spectrum is rising at the moment. I believe from a little bit of research that I've done is 1% can be seen as a fairly universal percentage point, although that all depends on diagnosis as well. Thinking of the 700,000, that's quite a significant number. But another way I'd like to look at it is that an autistic child in a family, or an adult for that matter, changes what the whole family can do. A lot of their activities, perhaps I could say, gets dictated. Maybe dictates too strong a word, but gets influenced by the fact that there is an autistic member in the family. So a lot of things become very difficult to do, and a lot of doors close. And that also increases with the further the individual is on the spectrum. So even though I can say 700,000 people in Britain, the larger pool of people that affects is significantly bigger. So looking at that statistic, and as I mentioned, Manchester Art Gallery having very much in its nature the wish to function as an educational establishment, when it was brought to our attention and when it was on our radar, we decided that it would be a good idea to put a dedicated program in place for autistic children and their family, so that they weren't excluded from the gallery. And if you think about it, I believe that the kind of exclusion can happen in both ways. Galleries, museums contain valuable objects and sensitive environments, if you like. Many parents with autistic children might choose not to go to a gallery because they'd be scared or worried about how their child might act in that environment. Would they, would they have an incident, Would they try to grab something? Would they get shouted at? So many parents perhaps would choose not to go into a gallery because of those valuable things in it. Likewise, many galleries mightn't be particularly well set up and mightn't have the right training in place. And I'll talk about that a little bit more too. So the exclusion kind of functions in both types of ways. And that's why we felt that we needed to put a program in place that would be dedicated towards autistic children and their families, so that they would know that the gallery was an okay place to come to, and we were prepared to welcome them. But to go back and talk a little bit about how we started off working on this program. This goes back to a training opportunity we had in 2014, where the National Autistic Society, the main autistic organization and charity in Britain, approached us and suggested they run a training session with us. And the training session was a real eye-opener to me and to all my colleagues. It was delivered by two members of the National Autistic Society. And one of those trainers was a parent of an autistic child. And she started off by speaking about visiting Manchester Art Gallery with her autistic child. And the visit didn't go well. Her son, when he sees a flight of stairs, has to run up the first section of stairs, run up and down 3 times. And when he came into the gallery, he ran up and down the first section of stairs 3 times. And he got shouted at by a museum member of staff, because the museum member of staff couldn't understand what this boy was doing, and he thought he was putting himself in danger by running up and down the stairs quickly 3 times. Because of that, the mother, whose name was Lorna, had to leave the gallery, and she described to me in the training session how she sat outside in her car with her son, and they both cried because of the experience. So she painted a very vivid picture, and myself and other people who were involved in this training decided that we didn't want people to feel like that. But at the same time, we recognized how the situation developed, and I couldn't criticize the member of staff for taking the action that they did. But it flagged up that we had to be aware of the needs and how autistic children or autistic people might act in the space. So that was quite an eye-opener. I'll mention a little bit more about the training as we go along, but that was really the starting point for the gallery realizing that this was a community, the autistic community was a community that we wished to connect with. So as I mentioned, we felt we had to do something deliberate and put a program in place that then could be communicated to the autistic community, that the Manchester Art Gallery was a good place for them to come. So working with the National Autistic Society, we identified that there needs to be a dedicated time. And we decided that on Saturday morning, of the 3rd Saturday of every month, we would open 45 minutes earlier just for autistic children and their families. Normally we open at 10 o'clock in the morning. Actually, at the moment, due to the pandemic, we don't open till 11, but in our normal calendar, we open at 10 o'clock every morning. So we decided to open at 9:15 one Saturday per month, just for autistic children and their families. That had two impacts, if you like. First of all, it meant that the autistic children and their families could come into the space before it got busy. And they had that dedicated time to relax and come to terms with the space. Because one of the things that autistic people experience is different smells, different sights, and things that surprise them or are unusual for them can affect them adversely. So we decided that 9:15, when the gallery is quiet and no one else was in, they could have dedicated time in the space. And on top of that, we also set up some basic activities in the space, whereby there would be materials that they could use. We have a dedicated family space in the gallery anyway, so that there was space that there would be materials, sometimes tactile, sometimes materials that they could build with or connect with. And as you can see in the image that I've shown here, there's a boy who's building blocks. And I'd say this often connects with our displays anyway, but there were things that they could do. And there was also somebody to welcome them, someone who had been trained in working with autistic children, and but not necessarily, and I should say this about myself, I'm not an expert in autism, and none of my staff colleagues or my team are experts in autism. But we've got to know, from working in the gallery and working closely with experts from the National Autistic Society, we've got to know certain things that we can do. But when I say kind of expertise, it's very much some expertise that we've acquired from a little bit of training and a little bit of experience of working with autistic children and families. But by no means am I an expert on autism. But little by little, we built up a bit of a program so that autistic children could be in the space. There'd be tactile things, there'd be low levels of noise, because noise often has a big impact, and there wouldn't be unexpected noise. And we had to get a little bit used to this, because sometimes, obviously, before we open the gallery at 10 o'clock, it's often a time when cleaning's going on. So there can be vacuum cleaners and people using vacuum cleaners around the building. So we had to be careful with that. And sometimes we made mistakes and just not realizing that there was something else taking place in the building. But essentially, what that 45-minute slot meant was that the autistic children and their families could relax in the space. And that was their time. And in many ways, I think they felt a sense of ownership and belonging, and perhaps even a little bit of privilege of having this time. One of the wonderful things about it was it actually didn't cost us any extra money in opening at 9:15. All our staff were there, they were getting ready for the day, but it was a fairly easy thing to do. We did supply some extra staff. As I mentioned, we'd have someone who would be there and give their time to the autistic children and make sure they could find their way into the building and through the spaces. But there wasn't any cost or any real cost in opening the building 45 minutes early. We also found that when other people came into the building at 10 o'clock and we were open to the general public, at that stage, the autistic children were much more relaxed in the space and then weren't particularly bothered about there being other people in the building, because they had got used to and acclimatized to the space earlier on. So most times the families would stay on longer, and it could be 12 o'clock, it could be 1 o'clock. Perhaps they'd spent the half day with us before they would choose to leave and go on to something else. So the impact of opening that 45 minutes earlier actually had a more of a lasting impact throughout the day. And little by little, what we would try and do in working on these, as I say, one Saturday a month sessions, was to get the individuals used to being in the gallery overall, with the hope that they would then come at other times to the galleries and at other times to get involved in sessions. And we did have some evidence, not of everybody continuing on in that way, but the autistic children and their families felt relaxed enough to come to the galleries, gallery at different times. And along with that, there was an element of the gallery getting used to autistic people being in the space and more understanding of what their needs could be and how we could facilitate that. There's a couple of things I'll mention now as well that we picked up early on the training that was very useful. And this is really just kind of some points, and I'll round this up on a slide when I finish too. One of the things that came out from the training was just some basic procedures. And some of these are well, they sound very obvious, but until they were actually stated to me, I wouldn't have known very much about them. On the days when we were working with the autistic children, we would always make sure not to wear very colourful or patterned clothes, especially striped shirts. I'm not wearing a striped shirt today, but I do like striped shirts and I wear them quite often at work. But I would know when I was working with the autistic groups that stripes wasn't a good idea because it amounts almost to visual noise for a lot of autistic people, and they would find that distracting and confusing and upsetting. The other thing that we have to be careful of is that we did not wear strong scents like aftershave and perfume, because once again, for individuals who are further along the autistic spectrum, they can find strong smells. They're very, very sensitive to smells, and they can find strong smells very upsetting or difficult to deal with. Once again, it creates a lot of noise and distraction for them. And the third thing is that one needs to keep hand gestures, like I'm doing now, to a minimum, because again, that builds up as a form of visual distraction, and as I say, it can cause upset or confusion. One other very basic thing that we were advised about was there can be many things that can cause someone who has autism to have an incident or an episode. And at that time, it's very useful for them, with their parent or the person they're with, to be able to withdraw to a quiet space. And what we did, and normally museums and galleries, I think, are able to do this, when we had our autism sessions, we would also have a dedicated quiet room. And in fact, when we got used to working with autistic individuals, we generally tried to have a quiet room, a dedicated room that was available. It doesn't have to be a particularly big room. In fact, in some ways, the plainer the room, the less things in it, the better. But it means that if an autistic person has an upset or there's something they can't handle, if they can withdraw to a room for a short period of time, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, they can often calm down, be at ease with themselves, and then be able to come out and function again. Now, the interesting thing about having the quiet room was, even though we identified the room and had it set up with, as I say, nice and plain, not too many things in it, I think it only got used once. But the fact that we had the quiet room made the autistic person and their families, the autistic child and their families, feel much more secure about visiting the gallery, because they knew if something upset them, there was somewhere for them to go. So it was almost like, if you think about it, a banister on a stair. You don't always need to grab it, but if you do, you're glad that it's there. And that's the way the quiet room worked for us. As I say, I can only recall it being used once in maybe about 4 years of running this program. But the fact that it was there gave a lot of assurance to the families that if they needed something, if they needed a space, it was available. There's just one more image of people in the space using the space. I say often we would set up tactile materials so that was something that they could do and feel and touch, and a way of expressing themselves. I'm shortly drawing to a close, but there's a few things I can also mention. And these are just kind of bits and pieces that we've picked up. As I've said up top, we felt it was important to have a quiet room that was available. And I'd say that could be an office space, it could be anything, anywhere that's straightforward. I should also mention we made a bit of a mistake, because at one stage we needed to recarpet the room that we had set up as a quiet room, and we didn't discuss it among ourselves. And I went in one day and found that we were going to have a problem, because the carpet that was put in the space was a striped carpet. And as I mentioned, with avoiding the striped shirts, a striped carpet I realized was also going to cause problems. It would be visually noisy, visually distracting, and it wouldn't be the right type of place for someone to come down. So, a point I would make is that even though we've learned a lot from doing this type of program, there are still mistakes that we make and still things that we've got to pick up and use. I mentioned also earlier on, when speaking, avoiding hand and other gestures, something that I've got to concentrate on. Avoid wearing multiple colors or stripes. It was quite handy because our museum assistants who are out on working on the gallery floor, generally their uniform is dark and black anyway, so that was fine. We also had to remind ourselves to avoid perfumes and scents. Something that was pointed out to me was the need to speak evenly and calmly, and sometimes give time for responses. Because if an individual is a bit further along the autism spectrum, they sometimes require time to process language. And there's something that can be called the 6-second rule, that if you come across this type of instance, after you've said something, you need to give the person 6 seconds to be able to process the information. I did that just to demonstrate that 6 seconds is quite a long time, and it feels a long time when you're talking. But if you were to spot that and see that 6 seconds was required, and if you didn't do that, the chances are that you would jump in, you would think the person's not listening or they're not responding, therefore I'll say it again. And that then increases the problem. I'd say it's not particularly common, but it's one of the pointers that is possible to pick up when you get used to working in this type of circumstance. Also, something that was said to me, and this was said to me by the trainer, was that sometimes the parent of an autistic child may be on the spectrum as well. And that's not too uncommon. Often the parent will have learned from life experience a bit more about how to deal with it, but sometimes it's useful to be aware that it's not just the child that you're working with, it's a family, it's a parent. I should also say that in doing this work, partnerships have been absolutely vital. It was key that we linked with the National Autistic Society. I mentioned we have a relationship with a school that specializes in working with autistic children. It's useful to have someone who's more expert than one is oneself in doing this work. And it's also very important for marketing and communicating and getting the word out that you got the program, because autistic families in Britain are very much kind of networked, and they speak to each other, and they trust each other to recommend things, and therefore in promoting this session, this type of work, it was very much a necessity to work in partnership with the community. I should also mention, and this is kind of, in some ways, this shows that it can be still quite a challenging program, I guess, to work. When we had our Saturday sessions, numbers attending them could be very variable. Sometimes we might have 30 or 40 people coming along. Sometimes it might just be 4 or 5. And that was very difficult to predict. Even with our marketing and talking to families in the autistic community, it was very difficult to determine how busy a session was going to be in advance. And after a while, I guess I got less worried about that, because for 4 people coming along, it was still a big impact, making a big impact with them, and the quality of the session was still very well. But and over a year would balance out. And anytime I thought, well, perhaps we need to do this differently, then a lot of people would suddenly come back. But it was difficult to predict. And the only way I could perhaps understand that is for a family with an autistic child, making arrangements can be quite difficult. Different things can happen. Many more obstacles can emerge. And even though you might plan to do something on a given day, something could happen that could make that very difficult to actually do. So I think there is still kind of problems and issues that autistic children and their families face that sometimes are very challenging to quantify. But as I said, over a year, the program still proved to be very popular, and things would even out, and we would have enough very popular busy sessions. And the last point I'll make is that even though there are commonalities amongst autistic people, one of the things that was said to me is that every person is different, and when you've met one autistic person, you've only met one autistic person. So that's really the end of my presentation. It's very much been a pleasure and a privilege speaking with you today, and it's been strange talking like this on Zoom, because I don't get a sense of kind of what people are picking up. But I would hope this is a start of some conversations. And Alsu has my email address. I hope there's questions now. It'd be good to have a conversation now. But Ramat, thank you.
Thank you, Ronan. We are really honored to have you here. I think the presentation was really interesting for all of us, and I really want to highlight the words of Ronan that you shouldn't really be an expert in order to work with children with autism. Well, you have to have a training with, for example, such organizations like National Autistic Society, but any person working in the museum can work with children with autism. You don't need any like huge financial support. And we do have a couple of questions in the chat, and I also have a few questions for you, Ronan. If you are not against, can we ask these questions?
Yeah, yes, please do. I would. I hope I can answer them, but I'll be more than
Well,
happy.
the situation in our country is quite different. Some of the parents of children with autism do not really want to accept that their children have autism, and the question is that how do we engage such people to museum? Is there some kind of a possibility to promote such programs?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I should say that what you've mentioned there isn't. It sometimes takes place in Britain too, that parents might be reluctant to have a diagnosis because they think their child will be stigmatized because of that. Yeah, I guess that is a difficult question because if the parent is worried about stigmatization, they would probably not want to gravitate towards this type of program. I guess what I would say is that, and this is kind of the point that I'd quite like to make, is that the communications techniques that I've touched on, I think are quite good general practice.
Yeah.
Speaking calmly, speaking slowly, listening, allowing time, isn't probably bad anyway. And I think there's some things that organizations can do that would help people who mightn't want to be identified as having autism. So there are some basic things in there that can make a museum more welcoming to everybody. I think for our dedicated program, if the parents are resistant towards it, that might be a barrier that can't be overcome. I think probably, and I hope this kind of helps with the answer, maybe cultural organizations in doing this type of work can make autism perhaps more acceptable and more understood. Because as I mentioned, there's so many points in the spectrum that people can slot in. And in fact, I think there's a case to be made that all of us are on the spectrum somewhere. If we think about it, all of us have things that can unhinge us for sometimes what might appear to be irrational reasons, but they're rational in a sense that they can cause upset with us. So I think we're all somewhere there. Maybe museums and galleries and cultural organizations can help spread that understanding and therefore make it more acceptable.
Yeah, like working in one collaboration towards one aim.
Yes.
And talking about that all the people have their spectrum, these programs you mentioned about, do you think that they are interesting for children without autism? And do actually people without autism come along with children with autism to these programs?
Yes, sometimes they do. And any of the things I've shown, like the building blocks or the materials you can see, if my screen is still visible at the moment, they're things that are there for that everybody can use. And yes, sometimes, and especially when the gallery was open to more visitors after 10 o'clock, there would be more people that would come in. So yes, these activities, they can be enjoyable for absolutely everybody. The only time that we kept the gallery exclusive for autistic children and their families was that first 45 minutes. And then we didn't have other people in, because that was giving the autistic children and their families enough time to relax in the space. But after that, anybody could join in. And yes, like the principles involved would appeal, I think, to everybody, and everybody could access those too, adults as well.
Yeah. Thank you. And talking about the session Open Doors, do you think that, you know that like children with autism have to adapt to all the building situations, and do you think that after a few sessions they can come to the gallery during regular hours?
Yes, we did notice that, because they felt more relaxed in the space, they would come to other sessions, other activities, and at other times. I would like to have seen more of that, to be honest. They did enjoy the sessions set aside from them, and that's when they would kind of have that dedicated time to come. But yes, they would appear in more often, and we would often get to know them a little bit more. And get used to them being in the space. As I say, I would like if more of it happened, and that fits in with some other work, dedication work that we do. We try and get people who aren't used to coming to the gallery to come to more sessions, not just the ones that include them. But I think there's always the need to make that special bit of effort. And I think that will always probably be the case.
Yeah, true. And the next question is, has the exposition of the gallery changed because of these programs in order to welcome children with autism?
No, not dramatically. The gallery is quite a big space, and we have many different parts of it. That there's certain things that autistic children and people might find upsetting, like noises and sudden noises. And we have had art displays that have had noises with them, contemporary video pieces and that type of thing. And we didn't change doing that. I think what we would do is, with the autistic children and their families, we would mention to them if there was something in a part of the gallery that mightn't appeal to them, or that might cause an upset. And that wouldn't be to say, don't go there, don't do it, but we would just make them aware that there was something perhaps happening that might be difficult for them. But we didn't deliberately change anything in any other parts of the gallery. But what we did for those Saturday sessions, we would have something going on, especially in that first 45 minutes, in a space that would appeal. And that's often using materials and texture and that type of thing. We also noted that occasionally autistic children would bring headphones with them that they would put on at certain times. And that would be just to cut out noises that they might find. To go back and answer your question, we would do some dedicated activities that would appeal to autistic children, but we wouldn't necessarily change anything else in the other galleries. It might make an exhibition, an interesting exhibition sometime, actually, to do something that would specifically appeal to the autistic community, because I think it would appeal much wider than that. I think it would be an interesting thing to do, but we haven't done that to date.
It would be interesting. And then we have a couple of questions in the chat. So what impact does this program have on the life and on the skills of children with autism?
That's a very good question. And I'd love to be able to ask it more in a more comprehensive manner. And I'd like to know more about it. Our real effort was to have the gallery as a welcoming space for autistic children who probably felt beforehand that the gallery was not for them. So that was our real aim, was to have the gallery as a welcoming space so that they would come to it. And in that way, they would be connecting more with the cultural life of the city and accessing the public building as everybody else could do. And from that, my hope, I guess, is that that then enables them to have a more active life and take part in more things. Now, I should also say that there are other cultural organizations in Manchester.
I think it's a very broad question, and I think one of the aim of Samarkand Half Marathon is also to engage more people and to increase their knowledge in such topics like autism, so they can know how to treat such people, how to work with such people. Our aim is not to cure them, because it's not curable. Our aim is not create something new. Our aim is to increase the knowledge of people around.
Yes, I think that would be the impact that would be very much looking for, that people can live more fulfilled lives.
Exactly. Hello? Ronan? Hello? I'm sorry.
Hello?
The connection was poor. I'm really sorry.
Okay, that's all right.
Yeah, so should we go to another question? The next question is very interesting. Do you have any exposition made by people with autism?
Not that I know of. I would suspect that some artists are probably on the autistic spectrum, but that's a really good question, because I don't actually know. And once again, that would be an interesting thing to do. I think it would be wonderful to put together an exhibition through the eyes of someone who is autistic. Thank you very much. I'm getting a lot of interesting ideas.
Yeah, actually, I think it should be in your plans.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good idea. As I say, it's possibly there has been some, but we just don't know about it. As you mentioned it, I would suspect some of my curatorial colleagues are somewhere along the spectrum as well. But it's, I think it could be a very interesting idea to put an exhibition together from the standpoint of someone who's seeing it through that autistic filter.
Yeah, exactly, because they probably see the world like from a different perspective.
Absolutely, yeah.
And the last question is from the fellow from ITP, April. Remember her?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, so she wrote, overall, what was the general reaction of children with autism when they came into the gallery? Were they curious about the artworks, excited, or were afraid, agitated of the artworks?
Yes, that's a good question. I would say initially coming in to the gallery, especially for the first time, autistic children and also their parents and families, and often it's the family groups that come in, would be quite wary and possibly slightly nervous. And we do everything we could to overcome that by, as I say, having having a calm space. Often we would sometimes use a calm music, but really we would try and encourage the autistic person to relax as they want in the space. Often the children would lie down on the floor and stretch out and have a look at the ceiling. Often they would notice details in the architecture and want to have a really close look at those. But that's absolutely okay. And being able to open early where they're dedicated use of space, it doesn't matter if they're lying down on the floor. It shouldn't matter anyway. But there's plenty of space. So often they would be nervous and reluctant and calm coming in, but then you see a relaxation, and that's where it becomes interesting. And a relaxation, and also then some more activity. Maybe they'll be building with blocks or making something, or almost plotting their own journey and their own activity and doing things that feel right to them, and that a feeling of being settled and adjusting into the space.
Thank you, Ronan, for the session. It was really interesting. Thank you for all the answered questions. And I also would like to ask you, is it possible if we send you some more questions later on, if some of the people who do not understand English will watch it later and would like to ask you something?
Yes, please, by all means. I might be able to ask all the questions, but I'll try my best, and I'll be honest when I can't answer them too. And I really hope that we can have some conversations, maybe not just on this topic, but others. And I should also mention, this network that Alsu and other ITP contact is involved in. It's very much part of this British Museum International Touring Programme network. So, I hope this will increase my contact with Uzbekistan, because I would love to learn more about your country and your museum culture. So maybe not just on this topic, but I would love to be in contact with the Uzbek museum community. I think that's how I learn. That's how I learn from your experiences too.
Thank you. I hope that next year, when we will not be in pandemic mode, you will come to Uzbekistan to visit us and to share some more knowledge and ideas with us, because your experience and your knowledge is very precious for us.
Well, there's thank you very much for that, Alsu. There's nothing more than I'd love to do than to be able to travel to Uzbekistan and to witness your great heritage and culture, and to learn from it too. Because I really believe that sharing ideas internationally can sometimes come up with some of the best programs and the best new fresh ideas. And I'd like to thank you all very much for this wonderful opportunity and this privilege of being able to speak with you.
Thank you so much for everyone for joining us today. And I would like to remind you that if you register for Samarkand Half Marathon, all the raised funds will go to the creation and equipping the art room for children with autism in the special school. Thank you. Then see you soon, Ronan. I hope that you will come to Uzbekistan soon.
I really would like to. Thank you very much, Alsu. It's been wonderful talking with you and talking with your colleagues.
Thank you.